for me, I wanted to be an analyst. So from the first day, I was just thinking, okay, I got to learn everything that he does. And that generally would start with...
Welcome back to another episode of Careers in Finance. I'm Anna Tallarico. And with me today, I'm so excited, is Duncan McKeen, my colleague at CFI, who I have been dying to get on the podcast here for the last couple of weeks. So Duncan, thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. Just delighted to be here. It's going to be fun.
It is going to be fun. So as you know, I like to explore careers in finance and people's journeys. And I find it so fascinating, the different paths that people take. And our audience seems to love these stories as well. It helps people, I think, see where their career might go or understand, how does one thing that happens in their career build on the next thing. And it's always so interesting to hear how people get started and then where their journey takes them. So I'm going to dive right in to your origin story. Did you always know that you were going to go into finance? Did you study it? Tell me a little bit about that. How did you come to be in finance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. I did not think I'd ever be in it when I was in school. I studied mechanical engineering. I went to work as a sales engineer, effectively selling big pieces of mechanical equipment into like the construction industry. And I did that for about 5 years, and I quickly realized that the products weren't that complex. Even though I was selling the most complex products that we had to other engineers, it's they weren't that complex. It's from one year to the next, it was oh wow, 5% more horsepower. Other than that, the machine didn't change, right? And over time, I just thought oh man, I have so much more to offer, and this isn't, it's not really challenging me that much. So I started to think about how I could leverage that into a next step. And most of my work at that company, Ingersoll Rand, was in the mining industry. And so I thought, okay, that's probably my in, because then, I could work, in capital markets. And what I was envisioning was equity research covering the mining sector, because it's when they're hiring into capital markets roles, it's pretty easy actually to find people with financial experience. It's more difficult for them to find people that have sector experience and have expertise in a particular sector. So they really like that. But I had no financial experience when I started down that path, though.
I love it. And well, number one, knowing you now for several years, I'm not surprised that you started as mechanical engineering. I can see that part of you. And I think you bring that in some ways to your approach to engaging learners and teaching and how you think about things. So I didn't know that about you. And somehow I'm not surprised. It fits for sure. So there's a question though here. So effectively a sales engineer doing this, how did you even know what equity research was? How did that kind of come into your worldview where I'm not going to do this? I maybe stay in my sector experience with mining, but parlay that into a finance, career. How did you know what equity research even was to know that that's what you might be able to jump into?
Yeah, it's a great question. At the beginning, I didn't. I was just looking for more complex things that I could be doing and how I could be making next steps. I was living in Toronto, and I had a lot of friends working in finance. So I started to hang out with them and ask them, have conversations with them about what are the different roles and what do people in finance and capital markets do. And through those conversations, I started to hone in on the idea of equity research, because I thought, well, this is really neat. I'm a very analytical person. I'm very numbers driven, and I also I like learning new things and figuring things out. And that's a lot of the work that equity research analysts and associates do. So that was a fit. But I had this, the biggest issue, or the biggest thing that I had to overcome, is I literally, in engineering, I took one course that was finance and accounting, and all these things just lumped together, just one chapter on each thing. And so I had, I guess, broad knowledge, but really not very deep at all. I literally didn't fully understand the difference between debt and equity as I was going in for interviews on Bay Street. It was crazy. I had nothing. In fact, my first interview, the analyst who I ended up working for, the first thing he said to me was, I only looked at your resume 5 minutes before the meeting. I did not see an MBA or a CFA on here. I don't even know why I took the meeting. That was right after I shook his hand, he said that to me. And I was like, oh my gosh, wow. Okay. You're right. Yeah. But yeah. So that was
a little bit of luck there. A little luck that he took the meeting, right? So, and by the way, I think it's important for people to hear these stories, because there's such a an assumption that you have to study it to get into a career in finance. But there's so many different careers and so many paths in. And I
Yeah.
think that people don't realize, there's different ways. It's not just about, necessarily getting a degree in economics or finance or anything. So you go into this interview, you don't really have any experience. He doesn't
Yeah.
see what he needs on your resume. Is that the job that you got?
Yeah, in the end. But like, maybe it was luck that I got the interview, but after that, it was not luck. It was just fighting and
Yeah.
hard work to get in there. It was like, I think the way I
Yeah.
answered that was I said, I have 5 years of mining experience. And like, I said carefully without insulting him that in engineering, I'd done much higher levels of mathematics that ever get done in finance. So it's like, okay, I can
Yeah.
figure this stuff out. And it's just,
Yeah.
I know this math. It's just, I need to understand like the language that you use within finance because it's different than the language that you use in engineering. So it started there. He still wasn't convinced. And so, but then the meeting ended with me saying, well, okay, so I think I understand what research analysts do. You build financial models, you use them to form an opinion, and then you communicate that opinion through the equity research that you publish. And I said, okay, well, how about if I built a model for you and then use it to form an opinion and write a report? Not even knowing what I was getting into, I was like, oh my gosh, what have I signed up for? Because like, so he bought into that. Okay, so, and I left the meeting and I was immediately started phoning all those same friends I was mentioning earlier. I'm like, what's a model? How do I build it? Give me some examples of models or equity research. Because I had to say that, otherwise I was dead in the water. So I thought, well, I'll commit to that. If I don't deliver, I don't deliver, but at least that's my only shot. So I did that in a couple of days of working all day, all night almost. And then he was based in Montreal. I made up a reason why I was going to be in Montreal. It was totally fictitious. And I said, I'll just drop in and I'll show you what I built. And it started there, but it was still a fight after that. Gosh, I was like their second pick by the end of that. And then the first pick didn't take their offer. So they reverted to me, but still I had to do calls with the head of equity research. And there was probably 4 or 5 outgoing calls to the hiring analyst and the head of research to try to convince them to hire me. I'm like, I'm not the best guy now. I'm admitting that I'm not the best guy, but in 6 months, I think I'm going to be the best guy because I have sales experience. I can sell these products. Like I have mining experience. Like it was a fight though. Like
So much hustle, and work to do that, to set your sights on something and get it. And then two, like self-confidence to just feel confident enough to say, I'm going to do it and jump in knowing that you didn't even know what a model was. So I don't know if you remember this, but do you even know, you say to this guy, I'm going to build you a model to show you, and you're going to your friends and going like, what's a model? Like, do you actually even remember those days of like, how did you get started? So you pull up Excel, obviously, but how did you get your mental framework without, examples and things in front of you?
I ended up getting my hands on about 3 different models, I think, and maybe 3 or 4 pieces of research. And I just sort of emulated what was there, but I had to do it for a different company because he said, fine, go do it for this company, knowing that he had to initiate coverage of that company. So he's getting me to do his work for him. Which is fine because I was trying to sign up for doing his work for him. That's what I did. I just sort of emulated what I saw there. It was not, looking at it today, it was like awful. But I think he appreciated like the drive and the hustle and making the effort to go see him. So yeah, it was really tough. And then, so I ended up getting that job, but then that was like, wow, what a relief I got the job. But then it's like, that was just one mountain I had to climb. Cause then it's like, I still don't have financial experience. And there was no CFI in those days. So it was like, so I made the choice to do CFA. That's another mountain I had to climb, like while I was working 80 hours a week. So trying to figure out that. And I built this one terrible model and this one awful report. So like then how to build better models and learning the companies he had under coverage. Just like many mountains to climb kind of thing. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about, there's kind of 2 parts I want to dig into on that first role. First is like, what was the role like, day to day and everything, but really too, this like learning on the fly. What was that first year or 2 like, where you're kind of just trying to figure it out as you go along? So you're kind of probably thrown in a bit. Did they provide you training actually at all?
No, I was no training provided. So this was an independent brokerage, and a lot of the training which gets done is happening by the banks will provide training going in. there's the most training provided to people in investment banking. They're bringing the lion's share of the revenue into the capital markets group. They have more budget to spend on training, less in equity research, and even less in a non-bank owned equity research jobs. There was no formal training. Not initially. I think I did some maybe a couple of years in, but not initially. It was really looking at the models he built, which by the way weren't great. So I was learning his bad habit, and asking a ton of questions, right? And being careful that when I got asked questions, if I didn't know the answer, I'd just say, I'm not sure, but let me try to figure it out for you. That's really important. You can't pretend. They'll see right through it.
Such
There's
an
no
important
experience.
skill.
Yeah.
Right. I wish every professional, young professional, all professionals knew, right? If you don't know, just say it and just say, I'll get back to you. Yeah. In true in any career for sure. So what was that first role like? Tell me a little bit about day to day. What was a day in the life like for you, those first couple of years in that role?
Yeah, totally. So, well, ultimately, what you're trying to do. So, first of all, you come in the position of a equity research associate, and then if you successfully progress to an analyst. I just mentioned that because it's the opposite on the investment banking side. You come in as an analyst, and then you progress to an associate. It's just confusing. So I came in as an associate, and an equity research associate. The relationship with the analyst is really like a marriage designed to not last. People last like a year to maybe 4 years in that role because they either become so experienced that they can do the same job as the analyst and they want to be an analyst, or they gain a bunch of experience and they leverage that to go somewhere else. So typically it's not forever. For me, I wanted to be an analyst. So from the first day, I was just thinking, okay, I got to learn everything that he does. And that generally would start with taking over some responsibility for the financial models. So first of all, getting into them, seeing what's there, and then understanding what happens and what you do with them when new information comes in. So it could be quarterly updates, company reports, results, and you're going through and you're updating the model, which is like the really heavy periods, like reporting season's awful in equity research because it's like all the companies report within a span of a week or two. And you're like, sometimes the reports are coming out late at night, and then you're trying to like digest them, form an opinion to get things into compliance by the next morning at 6, or they release a report announcement in the morning, which is really terrible because then you're under the gun to get something out before the market opens. So it starts off as a lot of work in the models. And then once you get familiar with them, you start taking over some of the responsibilities for writing the reports as well. Once you understand that person's view, and you also need to understand their writing style because you're trying to really pretend that you're them because their name's at the top and your name's underneath them. So it's as if they've written it. So you need to write it in their voice. So then, eventually if you're successful, you get to the point where you can just do all that stuff. And that's the point where, okay, you're ready to take on coverage on your own. Yeah.
So we're going to come back and talk about modeling, as you know, that's a big one. But what in that role and what you were doing and learning and all that, did you love it? Like, what did you love about it?
Yeah, I loved being like a private investigator. That was so cool. So you're like, company releases results and they say these things, and you're like, really? Let me find out. So if you look at the financials, sometimes everything looks fine. You got to go into the notes. That's where they're going to hide all the dirty little secrets. And you want to get to those because that's what the buy side wants. That's what a portfolio manager wants to hear is like, is there anything that they're trying to hide in here? Is there anything going on that's not, obvious on the surface? And that's what they want from you. And then you try to see if it's major enough that it would actually change your opinion on the company. And I loved that part of it. I loved the modeling part. I loved all the parts. Like I loved the modeling because then it was really played to like my engineering side, like attention to detail and building like an electronic replica of the company. And it was really neat then when you came to an opinion, then you got to get creative about how you were going to express that opinion and how you're going to sort of pitch it, because half of the job was digging into the models and trying to get to an opinion. But the other half of the job is like putting on a suit and going to New York or Chicago and like pitching these ideas to portfolio managers on the buy side once you got to the analyst position.
Yeah.
So I loved all parts of it.
Did you? So what was your next role after that first role? Was it analyst?
It was analyst, yeah, after a couple of
Yeah.
years,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it was super fun. It was I couldn't do
Yeah.
it today because it's super high pressure and it's very
Yeah.
very intense and can be stressful hours. And in
Yeah.
equity research, those hours also start really really early in the morning. Like I was up for a decade. I was up every morning at 4:30 or 5, trying to see what happened overnight in different markets and try to understand whether or not that will impact our markets when they open. And if there was a press release through the night, then you got to write it up immediately and get it in so it's out so you can start talking about it, ideally before the market opens. So like the whole thing, now a lot of the trading volume and stuff is happening really, really early in the day when the market first opens. So you've got this crazy, crazy intense morning, and then it kind of quiets down a little bit in the afternoon. Yeah.
So a little side road. I don't usually ask this, but you're talking about the reality of these roles. You're up at 4:30 every morning for a decade. You're lots of, just all lots of pressure, odd hours, lots of work. Was there a time in your time as an analyst that you found a way to balance your personal life too, or your health, or the things that were important to you, or was it just all grind, flat out, leaving it all on the field?
A pretty good balance, all things considered, I guess. As much as you can have balance when you're constantly doing about 80-hour weeks. And then I loved it. I really, really loved it. But I just got to this point where I realized I couldn't do it forever. Those kind of hours and that kind of the intensity I'm trying to describe is really like, so the best research analysts on the planet are still only right 60% of the time. That means 40% of the time, by the way, their clients are really aggravated with them, right? You have to have thick skin. And that's a lot of pressure because you're putting your opinions out there in print, and that's forever. So then if you're wrong, they know you're wrong. They can look back and see the research reports from 2 years prior, and you're going to be wrong. You just got to live with that. You just got to understand that without you, they'd have a 50-50 chance. And with you, maybe they've got a 60% chance of getting it right. And that gives them the advantage that they're looking for, so that kind of pressure. And I also got to the point where it was like, I couldn't find anyone working in those roles or even senior to those roles that had a life that I wanted. Like it wasn't balanced for a lot of the people. And I'm like, I want more balance than that. So that was when the transition or the thought to transitioning into teaching started for me.
Okay. So you were in that role for about 10 years, same firm, or did you through that time were you at different firms?
Two different firms. Yeah. GMP Securities, which is now Stifel, and then Macquarie Capital, which is like the largest bank in Australia. Big focus on natural resources, mining and oil and gas.
Yeah.
And infrastructure.
Yeah. So high pressure. I mean, as you're describing it too, it's like it's not the pressure of the time, right? It's the pressure of the responsibility, and right, and like as you said, of just making the calls or putting out your opinion, and people relying on that. I mean, I think there's several paths in finance that are like that, right? I think about venture, private equity. Say you're taking LP money and betting it, and there's pressure. There's a big responsibility with those. So you do it for a while, and then you start to think maybe something different because you're looking at the people that are, maybe further in their career and saying that's not the life that you want. Let me ask you this before we jump to just those moments of you're thinking about a different path and perhaps teaching. By that time, spoiler alert, Duncan McKeen, you are an incredible financial modeler, incredible trainer around financial modeling, very passionate about financial modeling.
Sure.
During the time as an analyst, those 10 years in doing equity research, had you kind of transformed from those early days of not knowing what the heck you were doing in modeling to what you would consider to be, expert, or did that come later as you jumped into teaching?
I would say I got to the point of being an expert in equity research in the sector I was covering. Take me out of that sector and I'd be like, oh my gosh, don't know other sectors, right? It's hard. And you really do get pigeonholed into one sector. And that's another thing which is frustrating because it's like mining's very cyclical. And what do you do when it literally just the whole thing rolls over, which it did. And I was literally not bullish on any of the companies I'm covering. So I'm writing these reports saying like sell, sell, sell. I'm like writing my own eulogy, right? It's like, okay, I need to find another job, right? So I did transition to other sectors. I started covering like fertilizers and other things. But yeah, so that was a part of the reason. But I guess your original question. So like, I didn't know at that time I wanted to go into teaching, but there's a teaching component to equity research because you have to know the companies really well, and then you end up teaching them to the buy side a lot, and you teach them about your investment thesis. So you're writing and you're training people on how it all works because a lot of them are in these roles. They don't necessarily know how your sector or subsector works. So there's a big teaching component to that. And I enjoyed that aspect of the job. My parents are both teachers too. So I kind of had this inkling that maybe this could be a thing.
Interesting. Okay. So tell us a little bit about that career transition. Like, did you it sounds like, you're reflecting on, you don't like continue what you see in the life. If you were to continue, were you exploring lots of different options, or did you pretty quickly hone in on you wanted to, become an instructor?
Yeah, I was exploring a bunch of different options. I explored the buy side. I worked on the buy side for a very short stint, not even a year. So that was a little bit more interesting to me because you could move across sectors a little bit more. You also didn't have the pressure of like, we're trying to sell equities all the time. Like there's no pressure to be bullish on stuff. You could just be bearish on it, or you could, if you're working for a long short fund, you can just short a sector that you think is going to go down. So, but yeah, ultimately for me, I just came to the realization teaching might be really, really interesting because I'd become an expert in equity research. I was a decent financial modeler. I wasn't an expert though. I'd been using the mouse shamefully for 10 years in
Okay.
research. I should be embarrassed to even say that. But so I wasn't, I wasn't even at the upper levels of like what a financial modeler should be doing, partly because I didn't have that much formal training in it. So I started learning to become a really expert modeler as I started teaching it, sort of learning on the job. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be in front of people now. I got to use the keyboard because it's like the right way to do it. No more mouse. I quit the mouse instantly and like just switched in like 2 weeks or something over to the keyboard. And that's when I really gained a ton of experience in financial modeling, I think. Yeah.
And was it, I just have to ask, because knowing you on the outside, it just feels like you have such a spark and a love for it and a passion for it, and a passion for doing it, well, and teaching others how to do it well. Did you find that there was a spark? Like at some moment you said, like, this is really important. Modeling well is important and I love it and I love teaching it. Did you find that there was some kind of spark in you?
Yeah, there was. When I first figured out I wanted to teach, first of all, I thought that was like at a university. It's like, well, that's where people teach. So I went and started teaching at university, taught like an intro to finance course at Queen's. And then I got back in touch with some people at the Marquee Group because they had taught me one course. And so I knew them. And that's when kind of the spark happened. It's like, oh, wow, I could do teaching and I could do it on financial modeling. And it doesn't have to be so theoretical and academic. It can be more practical, which resonated a lot more with me. So that's really when the spark happened and things started to align. And I really started seeing like the next vision for where I wanted to go. And it was just a great fit, an amazing fit. And I loved it. Did that for including like what I've done at CFI as well. It's probably over a decade, maybe 12 years now of teaching financial modeling, mostly in person, but now for 3 years asynchronously.
So two questions. I guess really this is maybe the easier one. What do you love about teaching, or what do you find? Why is it right for you?
It's a good question. I love first of all, I like learning things myself. And so when I learn things myself and I have those like aha moments myself, I want to share those. I want to share those with others because it just feels really good. And in live teaching, I was able to see them have those aha moments in person, which is very, very rewarding. Now I have to imagine them having aha moments because they're happening, asynchronously, or they're happening through the comments later or something like that. So I do really love that about teaching. I also think I'm just naturally good at like boiling things down to basic principles and then communicating those out. So yeah, I don't know. I just think I'm thankful because I think I was just born with it. I did not really go through formal teaching training, really, not much. So I'm very, very thankful for that. I just think it was just something that I just have.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it was in your blood with your parents, but
I think
I
so,
would
yeah.
agree that it is a natural gift of yours, having sat through some of your live training. Lucky enough, you've done some Macabacus training here with us on the staff, which is
For sure.
always so fun. But your courses as well. I mean, it definitely seems like you've got the gift to touch. So, switching gears a little, what do you love about modeling? Like, just what is it about it that really speaks to you?
It's a good question. It's almost tough. I don't think about it too much. I just love it. I like Excel. It feels very fast and efficient to me. When you're on the keyboard, it's like it feels like you're just getting a lot done. I do like that. I also like it's like it's an art as well as it is a science too. It's not just numbers, it's design. Good design is not easy to do. I like that challenge. I like the mix of the creativity of the design of the model and also the sort of the analytical aspect of the quantitative things that you're investigating. Also like the idea of it's also probably the best way to learn about a company. And a lot of people would say until you've modeled a company, you don't really know it. I agree with that. You can think you know it. Great. Go build an electronic replica, the whole business, like replicate everything that's in the business inside a model. And then you're done. Through that process, you learn so much about the company. It's really important. So I do love that because it's like an opportunity to learn about a lot about a business. So I really like that about it too. I also think it's something that a lot of people haven't had formal training on. So I think that like doing it also, I get this sense that like, wow, people are really going to appreciate this, because a lot of people just haven't been through that great formal training before. They just learned like I did from somebody else's, bad habits. It's very common.
Yeah, it's so true, and it always surprises me. It shouldn't surprise me anymore that sometimes in the middle of the night when I can't sleep and I'm looking at all the subreddits, and there's invariably every night there's somebody saying, "I just haven't got asked to build a model," and some finance subreddit, and I don't have any clue where to start. Like just and so I think so many people kind of get thrown into it, but. It strikes me not only that you love modeling and you're passionate about that, but you're really true about just doing it right and doing it exceptionally well. And and so why do you think that is? Like, why do you? It's not just that you like modeling, right? You like to do it really well and teach others how to do it exceptionally well. And I think there's this. I don't know if that comes from your mechanical engineering background, maybe, or just your perfectionism.
It might. Yeah, it might. The perfectionism and the mechanical engineering background are actually two things which were a hindrance to me at the beginning. Like my first models were awful. They were like I was replicating every transaction inside the company. This is way too complex. Actually, and this is a true story. When I started working and covering my own companies, and ultimately the buy side asks for your models a lot. I'd send my models out. I wouldn't hear from them again because they probably open their up and they're like, this is a disaster. I can't understand it. Like his brain maybe understands it in his way, but this doesn't work for me too much. So I had to learn how to like whittle them down just to like, okay, what are the important things? Okay, these 400 rows, this can be like 5 rows. Don't need this detail. Doesn't matter. So a lot of it was just learning how to strip it down to what's important. So it was a hindrance a little bit at the beginning for sure. Yeah.
So, as I wrap up careers in finance, I always ask, what does it take to be successful in the person's role? So I'm going to ask you 3 times because there's 3 things I want to ask you about that.
Okay.
I guess the first thing is, somebody who wants to get into equity research or, have a successful career in equity research, what advice would you give them? Or what do you think it takes to be successful?
It's a great question. I guess whatever I'm going to say probably applies to investment banking too. Attention to detail is huge, really huge. So like you think about either of these roles, the advice you're giving to people, whether it's investment banking advice, whether or not they should go buy another company, or equity research, whether or not they should take a large position in a company, you're asking somebody to make a big financial decision on your advice. And that advice is based on analysis you've done. You have to double, triple check it 4 times, have peers check it. You have to have attention to detail. It really, really matters. You can't have them find an error in a model or an error in a presentation. Otherwise you're shot. It's over.
Yeah.
They'll just go to the next analyst, and that'll be that for that client.
Yeah.
So important for sure. That's a huge one. So just you have to do that, and you have to enjoy it and care about it enough to do it. If you don't like it, then it's not for you, maybe, right?
Yeah. Well, so that was, what did it take to be successful in equity research? And I bet, so the next thing I was going to say, what does it take to be a successful modeler? And I bet it's attention to detail too, right? Similar answer, you think?
Yeah. It is efficiency too, is a big one. Like I wasn't an incredibly efficient modeler because I was using the mouse. So shameful. But you have to be now. You really do. You have to move fast on them. You're under a time crunch all the time. Is important. Also, what we mentioned earlier is that if you don't know, do not ever pretend. It's so sometimes people in capital markets will ask you a question that's tough. They already know the answer to, and they're only asking you to see how you answer it. And if you say when you don't know, it's just a test. I didn't know that going in, but I didn't have the advice like, do not pretend. You can't. It's totally fine to say, okay, I know this one thing you asked about, but this other thing, I'm not sure, but I'm going to look into it and I will get back to you. And that's totally fine. That's what they want to hear, because they don't want to then communicate something that's incorrect across to a client and then tarnish that relationship.
Yeah, such good advice. And then what do you think well, let me ask you this. Somebody who wants to get into training, right? I think there's finance professionals who are thinking about what does the next chapter look like for them, and training is an option and a route. What do you think? What advice would you give to somebody who wants to maybe transform their current role into a teaching role in finance and banking? What do you think it takes to be successful, or what kind of advice would you give somebody?
I would say that if they think they might be interested in it, then go try it in some small way. For me, I was doing a tiny bit of it in equity research, and I enjoyed those parts of the job. So then it didn't immediately start in going into university and teaching. I went to the university and just started doing little guest lectures, like just little 15-minute stints inside somebody else's course. And that's a great, really low pressure way to just see if you like it. See if you like it, see if you think you're good at it and stuff. And eventually that transitioned into a course, and then like full-time teaching, which is what it's been for a number of years now. But I would just say, go figure out a way to just do teaching somewhere in some small way, or mentoring.
Love that. I love that, especially because I find the more of the careers in finance podcast interviews I do, the more this idea of just throwing yourself into something, just doing something becomes this advice and this through line through all of these interviews, because there's so many moments in our professional development that we just have to go for it, right? We have to say, I'm going to leave mechanical engineering and I'm going to, jump into equity research and I'm going to go for it, or I'm going to leave equity research and go into teaching. That you just have to kind of sometimes take the leap, right?
Yeah, not always have to take a full leap, but this is why I like to just go try it. Like I would give that advice too to somebody who thinks they might be interested in a financial role, or might be interested in FMBA. It's like, so go build a model. Go see if you like building models. It's not for everybody. You might love it. You might also be like, oh man, this sucks. Way too many numbers. My wife comes in and sees spreadsheets up on my screen. She's like, how do you do that? It's so boring. I'm like, I don't know. I love it. So go try it. See if you love it. Because if you're going to go into an financial interview nowadays, you kind of have to have done some modeling prior to that interview anyways, because you need to know about it. You need to speak to it. You need to even maybe have examples on hand that you can show them of things you build. Either it's printouts that you can take in or files that you can send them after the interview. That's pretty important. So best to find out if you like it.
Yeah. And I like just get in and just start doing things and playing around, get some model examples or templates and start to work on it, right? Scott and I were just talking about this. And one thing that's different in finance today, it's such a, historically you got the job and then you got trained. When Scott started 30 years ago, he got the job and then he spent 6 months being trained by his employer. And he was saying, these days the employers expect you to come with skills or with having done some things that you can show. And I find that across not just finance and banking, that's true. I was saying, even today, right? You write a book and build your audience before you get a publisher. It used to be you got a publisher and they did those things with you. So I think in every industry, that's more and more true. Like we have to be learning and exploring and being curious and doing some of these things before can't just kind of walk in cold, right?
No, it's very true. You have to walk in with the skills. They're not going to put you through 6 months of training anymore, for sure. Yeah. It's like if you don't have the skills on day one, they'll find the person that does. So you got to get them for sure.
Well, Duncan, thank you for joining me. I feel really lucky to get to work with you. You're such an inspiring teacher, and the creativity and the innovation and the passion that just comes through. So I feel really lucky, and I feel really lucky that you are a guest today too. Thank you.
Also, I feel very lucky to be here as well. It's fun to do the podcast too. A lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode. See you next time.
Yep. Thanks everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.